The heart monitor's steady beeping was the only sound in room 314 when my phone rang at exactly 6:47 a.m. I fumbled for it with hands that still shook from the anesthesia, my chest feeling like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it 3 days running. Mrs. Patterson? This is James McCready from McCready and Associates. I have some rather urgent news about your late husband's estate. Now, let me tell you something about lawyers calling at dawn. It's never about parking tickets. What is it, James? I managed, my voice scratchy as sandpaper. The triple bypass had left me feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train, then backed over for good measure. The oil stocks, ma'am. The ones from Harold's Oklahoma venture? They've hit something extraordinary. We're looking at approximately $12 million, Mrs. Patterson. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. 12 million. Harold's worthless stocks that the kids had rolled their eyes about for 20 years. The same investments David had called Dad's fool's errand just last Christmas. I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the holes in each square, while my mind raced. $12 million. After 73 years of clipping coupons and buying generic everything, I was rich. Rich enough to never worry about anything again. Rich enough to finally see who my family really was. By 8 a.m., I was feeling steady enough to text the family chat. My fingers moved slowly across the phone screen. Getting discharged today. Could use a ride home from the hospital. Recovery's been rough. David's response came within minutes. Call a taxi, I'm watching TV. I stared at those words until they blurred. My son, 45 years old, couldn't pause his television to pick up his mother after heart surgery. Sandra chimed in next. Stay another month, it's so nice without you. My daughter-in-law. The woman I'd helped through her difficult pregnancy with my grandson. The woman I'd lent $5,000 to when David lost his job. The woman I'd babysat for every weekend for 3 years running. I set the phone aside and laughed. It started as a chuckle and grew until tears ran down my cheeks. The nurse rushing in probably thought I was having some sort of breakdown. Mrs. Patterson, are you all right? Oh, honey, I wiped my eyes. I'm better than all right. Could you do me a favor? There's going to be a news crew here this afternoon. Channel 7. Make sure I look presentable, would you? James had explained that the oil discovery was big news. Big enough that the local station wanted to interview the sudden millionaire. The irony was too perfect to pass up. At 2 p.m. sharp, Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 arrived with her cameraman. She was a pretty young thing with ambitious eyes and perfect teeth. Mrs. Patterson, how does it feel to go from hospital patient to millionaire in one day? I smoothed my hair and looked directly into the camera. Well, Jennifer, it's been quite educational. You learn a lot about people when you're lying in a hospital bed after heart surgery. You learn about what really matters to family. And what have you learned? That family comes first. I paused, letting the words hang in the air like morning mist. But apparently that's not always both ways. Jennifer leaned forward, sensing a story. What do you mean by that? I told her about the text messages. About calling for help and being told to take a taxi while my own son watched television. About being told to stay away longer because it was nice without me. The thing is, I said, looking straight into that camera, when you have money, people's true colors show real quick. But sometimes it takes not having their help when you need it most to see what those colors really are. The segment aired at 6 p.m. I was back in my hospital bed. I'd decided to stay one more night, just to see what would happen, when my phone started ringing. First call, David, sobbing into the phone. Mom, I'm so sorry, I didn't know you were rich, I didn't know you needed me so bad. I listened to him stumble over his words for a full minute before I spoke. David, honey, I'm still the same person I was this morning when you told me to call a taxi. Second call, Sandra, her voice honey-sweet in that fake way she used when she wanted something. Mom Patterson, we saw the news. We're so happy for you. David and I were just talking about how we should all take a family vacation together. Somewhere nice like Europe maybe. How thoughtful, I said. Just yesterday you thought it would be nice if I stayed away longer. Third call, my neighbor Betty, who'd apparently seen the news. Marge. I had no idea about Harold's investments. Listen, I've been thinking, you really shouldn't be living alone at your age. I could move in, help take care of things. By 8 p.m., the phone had rung 87 times. I'd stopped answering after the 20th call from David and the 15th from Sandra. My youngest grandson Tommy called around 9. He was 15 and had always been my favorite, though I'd never let on. Grandma Marge? I saw you on TV. Are you okay? Like really okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. Good. Mom and Dad are acting weird. They keep talking about you and money and saying we need to visit more. But I wanted to call because you looked sad on TV. Are you sad? Out of the mouths of babes. A little, Tommy. Sometimes people disappoint you. Yeah. Hey, want me to come visit this weekend? Not because of the money stuff. Just because I miss playing cards with you. For the first time in 3 days, I smiled genuinely. I'd love that, honey. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet hospital room and thought about Harold. He'd been gone 5 years now, but I could almost hear his voice. Marge, you always said you'd know what to do when the time came. Well, the time had come all right. The next morning, I discharged myself and took a taxi home, just like my loving family had suggested. The house felt different somehow. Bigger, quieter, full of possibilities instead of just memories. I made myself coffee in my favorite mug and sat at the kitchen table where Harold and I had shared breakfast for 47 years. Then I picked up my phone and called James. I want to set up a trust fund, I said, for my grandson Tommy's college education. As for the rest, I paused, watching a cardinal land on Harold's bird feeder outside the window. Let's talk about that animal shelter downtown. And the literacy program at the library. They could probably use some help. When David called that afternoon, his 38th attempt since the news aired, I finally answered. Mom, thank God. We've been worried sick. We're coming over with dinner, and Sandra made that casserole you like, and we thought we could talk about. Call a taxi, I interrupted gently. I'm watching TV. The silence on the other end was worth $12 million all by itself. But Mom. David, honey, yesterday when I needed you most, you couldn't be bothered. Today, when you need me most, well. I settled back in Harold's old recliner and picked up the remote. Seems like perfect timing to catch up on my stories. I hung up and turned on Channel 7. They were running the interview again. On screen, I watched myself say those words. Family comes first, but apparently that's not always both ways. The woman on TV looked tired but dignified. Strong, like someone who'd finally learned her own worth. I raised my coffee mug to her. Here's to new beginnings, honey. Here's to finally knowing who's who. Outside, Harold's cardinal sang from the feeder, and for the first time in years, I felt like singing along. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel too. Get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. The taxi pulled up to my little blue house on Maple Street just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold that reminded me of David's baby blankets all those years ago. Funny how memories can sneak up on you when your heart's already tender from surgery. I paid the driver with trembling fingers, partly from the medication, partly from anticipation, and made my way up the familiar walkway I'd traveled 10,000 times before. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't just Rose Patterson coming home from the hospital. I was coming home to my real family. The porch light flickered on before I reached the door, and I could see movement through the sheer curtains in the living room window. My heart, already fragile from the bypass, swelled with an emotion so pure it almost brought me to my knees. They were waiting for me. They were actually waiting. The door swung open before I could even reach for my keys, and there stood Marcus Williams, all 6 feet and growing of him, his dark eyes bright with relief and something that looked suspiciously like tears he was trying not to shed. At 17, he was trying so hard to be the man he thought he needed to be. But right now he looked like the scared kid who'd shown up on my doorstep 2 years ago with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and a heart full of hurt. Grandma Rose, the name he'd given me, the name that meant more than my own, spilled from his lips like a prayer answered. Before I could protest that I was supposed to take it easy, his long arms were around me in the gentlest hug, as if I were made of spun glass. "Oh, honey," I whispered against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of the cologne I'd bought him for his birthday. "I'm home." "We thought," his voice cracked, and he cleared his throat, stepping back to look at me with eyes that had seen too much for 17 years. "We thought maybe your son would bring you home, and we'd have to pretend again that we didn't live here." The knife of guilt twisted in my chest, sharper than any surgical pain. "No, sweetheart. No more pretending. Not ever again." Before I could explain what I meant by that, 2 more figures appeared in the doorway. Jasmine Torres, 15 and fierce, with her wild curls barely contained by the headband I'd bought her last week. She was trying to look nonchalant, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed, but I could see the worry lines around her dark eyes that had been etched there by too many adults who had disappointed her. "About time you got back," she said, but her voice was soft with relief. Marcus has been pacing around here like a caged tiger, and Ethan's been cooking enough food to feed half the neighborhood. I told them you were fine, but nobody listens to me. Behind her, Ethan Murphy's red head bobbed into view. At 14, he was still small for his age, all sharp angles and nervous energy, but his green eyes lit up when he saw me. In his hands, he held a plate covered with aluminum foil. "I made your favorite," he said shyly, holding out the plate like an offering. "Chocolate chip cookies. I know you're not supposed to have too much sugar after surgery, but I made them with applesauce instead of butter, and I looked it up online to make sure it was okay for your heart and—" Ethan honey-breathed. I laughed, accepting the plate and feeling tears prick my eyes. This boy, who'd been shuffled through 7 foster homes before landing on my doorstep, had spent his afternoon researching heart-healthy baking just for me. "Come on," Jasmine said, taking my arm with surprising gentleness. "Let's get you inside before the neighbors start wondering why we're having a reunion on the front porch." They ushered me into the living room, and I had to stop and just look around. In the 2 days I'd been gone, they'd transformed the space. Fresh flowers, daisies from the garden we'd planted together, sat in a mason jar on the coffee table. The throw pillows were fluffed and arranged just so. The hardwood floors gleamed, and I could smell the lingering scent of lemon polish. "Did you 3 clean this entire house?" I asked, sinking gratefully into my favorite armchair, the one with the faded blue upholstery that David had always said I should replace. "Maybe," Marcus said, trying to look casual as he settled onto the couch across from me. "We figured you shouldn't have to worry about housework when you got back. Plus," Jasmine added, curling up on the opposite end of the couch, "we were going kind of crazy with you gone. Ethan stress cleans, Marcus stress paces, and I stress organize. This place has never been so spotless." I looked at these 3 beautiful souls, my children in every way that mattered, and felt my heart breaking and healing at the same time. For 2 years, I'd kept them secret from David and Sandra, terrified that my son would follow through on his threat to have me declared incompetent if he found out I was fostering teenagers. Problem kids, he'd called them during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. The kind that would ruin our family's reputation. What David didn't understand, what he'd never understood, was that family wasn't about reputation or blood or keeping up appearances. Family was about showing up. It was about Marcus staying up until midnight to help me understand my new smartphone. It was about Jasmine braiding my hair when arthritis made it hard for me to manage it myself. It was about Ethan learning to cook my favorite meals and leaving little notes in my purse that said, "Have a good day, Grandma Rose," in his careful handwriting. "So," Marcus said, interrupting my thoughts, "how are you feeling?" "Really feeling, not just the polite answer you give to people who don't actually want to know." I smiled at his directness. Marcus had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things, maybe because he'd learned early that life was too short for superficial conversations. "Tired," I admitted. "A little sore. But better now that I'm home with you 3. Did your son visit you in the hospital?" Jasmine asked, and I could hear the edge in her voice. She'd never met David, but she'd heard enough to form her own opinions. "He did," I said carefully. "Both he and Sandra came." "And?" Ethan prompted, settling cross-legged on the floor beside my chair like he used to do when he first arrived, when he was still afraid that chairs weren't really for him. I took a deep breath, tasting the weight of the secret I'd been carrying. "These kids, my kids, deserve the truth. They offered to let me stay with them while I recover," I said. "And when I told them I needed to come home, they weren't very understanding about it." "Because they don't know about us," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question. No, they don't know about you. But that's not your fault, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It's mine." I leaned forward, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "I've been a coward, keeping you 3 secret. I was afraid of what David might do, afraid he'd try to interfere with our family here. But watching them today, seeing how little they understand about love and sacrifice and what really matters, I realized I've been protecting the wrong people." The room fell quiet except for the tick of the mantel clock David had given me for Christmas 5 years ago, back when he still visited regularly, before Sandra decided I was too much trouble to bother with. "So what are you saying?" Jasmine asked, and I could hear the hope she was trying not to let into her voice. "I'm saying no more secrets. No more hiding who you are to me, or pretending you don't live here when people come by. You 3 are my family. My real family. And I'm done acting like that's something to be ashamed of." Marcus stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. What if your son tries to cause trouble? What if he tries to get us taken away from you? It was a valid fear. All three of them had been through the system enough times to know how precarious their situation was. One complaint, one investigation, one social worker having a bad day, and they could be scattered to different homes across the state. Then we'll face that together, I said firmly. But I don't think it will come to that. David may be selfish and short-sighted, but he's not cruel. And Sandra? Well, Sandra cares more about appearances than anything else. Having it known that her mother-in-law is fostering children might actually appeal to her sense of social responsibility. You really think so? Ethan asked, his voice small with hope. I think, I said, reaching out to ruffle his red hair, that it's time we stopped living in fear of what other people might do and started living in the light of what we know to be true. We're a family. A real family. And families don't hide from the world. Jasmine uncurled herself from the couch and came to kneel beside my chair. So if someone asks who we are, we can say we're your foster kids? We don't have to pretend to be the neighbor's children anymore. You can say you're my kids, period, I said, taking her hand. Foster, adopted, biological, those are just words. What matters is what's in our hearts. Grandma Rose. Marcus turned from the window, and I could see the shine of tears he was finally letting fall. I have something to tell you. What is it, sweetheart? I won, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I won the state science fair. The results came in this afternoon. The plate of cookies nearly slipped from my lap as I gasped. Marcus. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Tell me everything. There's more, he said, coming back to sit on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. They want to interview me for the evening news. About my project, about how I got interested in renewable energy, about my plans for college. That's amazing, I breathed. I'm so proud of you. The thing is, he continued, they want to interview me tomorrow evening. And they asked about my family, about who would be there to support me. He looked up at me with eyes that held a question and a challenge and a hope all rolled into one. I told them I'd have to check with my foster grandmother, but that she was the most important person in my life, and I really wanted her there. The silence stretched between us, heavy with possibility and fear and love. What did you tell them about me? I asked quietly. The truth, Marcus said simply. That you took me in when no one else would. That you helped me with my homework every night and drove me to every science club meeting and bought me books about renewable energy, even when money was tight. That you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Jasmine made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You're really going to be on TV? We're going to be on TV, Marcus corrected. If Grandma Rose says yes. If she's ready to let the whole world know who we are to each other. I looked around the room, at Marcus with his brilliant mind and gentle heart, at Jasmine with her fierce loyalty and hidden vulnerability, at Ethan with his quiet strength and boundless capacity for love. These children had been thrown away by a system that saw them as problems to be managed rather than people to be treasured. They'd been dismissed by adults who were supposed to protect them, shuffled around like unwanted furniture. But they'd found their way to my door, and I'd found my way to them, and together we'd built something beautiful. Something worth protecting. Something worth celebrating. Yes, I said, my voice strong and clear. Yes, I want the whole world to know who you are. I want them to see what I see. 3 incredible young people who've overcome more than most adults ever will, who've built a family out of nothing but love and determination and hope. Ethan launched himself at my chair, wrapping his skinny arms around my neck. Really? You're not scared? Terrified, I admitted, hugging him back. But not of the world knowing about you 3. I'm scared of not being the grandmother you deserve, of not being strong enough to protect you from people who don't understand what we have here. You are strong enough, Jasmine said fiercely. You're the strongest person I know. And we're going to help protect this family too. We're not helpless little kids anymore. No, I agreed, looking at their faces, young but wise, hopeful but realistic, scarred but not broken. You're not. You're incredible young adults who happen to live with someone who loves you more than life itself. The phone rang then, startling us all. The landline in the kitchen, the one David always called because he said my cell phone had terrible reception. We looked at each other, and I saw my own thoughts reflected in their faces. It was past 8 o'clock, late for David to be calling, especially after our confrontation at the hospital. Want me to get it? Marcus asked, already halfway to his feet. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I'll take it. No more hiding, remember? I made my way to the kitchen, aware of 3 pairs of eyes following my every move. The phone was on its fifth ring when I picked it up. "Hello, Mom." David's voice was tight with something I couldn't identify. Anger? Embarrassment? "Mom, I need to talk to you." "I'm here," I said simply. "There's been a news story," he said, and I could hear Sandra's voice in the background, sharp and urgent. "About some kid who won a science fair." He was talking about his foster grandmother, about how she was in the hospital and... David's voice trailed off, and in the silence, I could hear the pieces clicking together in his mind. "Mom," he said finally, his voice very quiet. "Please tell me that boy on the news wasn't talking about you." I looked through the kitchen doorway at Marcus, Jasmine, and Ethan, who were trying to pretend they weren't straining to hear every word of this conversation. "My children. My heart. My real family. His name is Marcus Williams," I said clearly. "And yes, he was talking about me. He's one of my foster children. I have 3 of them." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, David spoke, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "Mom, the whole town is calling. Everyone saw it. They're calling you a saint, saying how proud they are to live in the same community as someone who would take in troubled kids, and Sandra's been crying because she realized what we did today, how we left you at the hospital while you were taking care of children who needed you." I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of vindication and sadness wash over me. This was what it had taken: public recognition, social pressure, the realization that their behavior had been witnessed and judged by their peers. "David," I began, but he cut me off. "No, Mom, please let me finish. I was wrong. We were wrong. I said those things about foster kids ruining the family name, but watching that boy on TV, seeing how much you mean to him, how much good you've been doing. God, Mom, you've been a saint and I've been. You've been afraid," I said gently. "Afraid of change, afraid of complications, afraid of anything that might disrupt the life you've built. I understand that, son. But fear is a terrible reason to turn away from love." Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Marcus watching me with an expression of such hope and anxiety it nearly broke my heart. This boy who'd won the state science fair, who was going to college on a full scholarship, who had a future as bright as the stars he studied. He was afraid that this phone call would somehow take away the only stability he'd ever known. "Can we?" David's voice cracked. "Can we come over? Sandra wants to apologize, and I want to meet these kids, and we wanted to be better. To be the family you raised me to be." I looked at my children, because that's what they were, regardless of what any piece of paper said, and saw them listening with expressions of cautious hope mixed with protective suspicion. "Not tonight," I said finally. "I just got home from surgery, and we need some time to process all of this. But maybe this weekend. Maybe we can all sit down together and figure out how to move forward." "Okay," David said, and I could hear relief in his voice. "Okay, that sounds good. Mom." "Yes. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud to be your son." After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settling over me like a blanket. In less than 24 hours, my entire world had shifted. The secret I'd been keeping was out, the family I'd been protecting knew the truth, and the children I'd been hiding were about to step into the light. "Grandma Rose," Ethan's voice was soft from the doorway. "Are you okay?" I turned to look at him. This boy who'd been abandoned by his birth parents, rejected by his extended family, and shuffled through the system like a piece of unwanted mail until he'd landed here, in my kitchen, calling me grandma and worrying about my well-being. "I'm perfect, sweetheart," I said, opening my arms to him. "Absolutely perfect." As he hugged me, I felt Jasmine and Marcus join us, their arms wrapping around both of us in a group embrace that felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. Tomorrow, Marcus would be on the evening news, telling the world about his foster grandmother who believed in him. Tomorrow, people would know the truth about the 3 teenagers who lived in the little blue house on Maple Street. Tomorrow, David and Sandra would have to reconcile their image of acceptable family with the reality of what family actually meant. But tonight, we were just us. For people who'd found each other in the wreckage of disappointment and built something beautiful from the pieces. Tonight, we were home. "So," Jasmine said, pulling back to look at me with a grin that transformed her entire face. "Ready to be famous?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Bring it on," I said. "The whole world is about to find out what I already know, that the 3 of you are the best thing that ever happened to me." As we made our way back to the living room, I realized that this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities to prove that family wasn't about blood or appearances or social expectations. Family was about showing up, day after day, with love and patience and the absolute certainty that the people around your kitchen table were worth fighting for. And these three, Marcus with his brilliant mind and generous heart, Jasmine with her fierce loyalty and hard-won wisdom, Ethan with his quiet strength and endless capacity for hope, they were worth fighting the whole world for. The evening news interview was going to be interesting indeed. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. The morning after David's phone call, I woke to the smell of coffee and something that might have been pancakes, though with Ethan's experimental cooking, you could never be entirely sure. My chest was tight from the surgery, but my heart felt lighter than it had in months. No more secrets. No more hiding. Well, almost no more secrets. As I made my way to the kitchen in my worn terry cloth robe, I found my 3 children clustered around the small television on the counter, their voices hushed with excitement. Unprecedented cooperation with local law enforcement has led to the arrest of 12 individuals in what authorities are calling the largest elder fraud scheme in the city's history, the morning news anchor was saying. Jasmine looked up as I entered, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. "Grandma Rose, they're talking about some old lady who helped the cops catch criminals. Can you imagine? Some grandmother going undercover like she's in a spy movie." My coffee mug slipped slightly in my hands, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. "Is that so?" "Yeah," Marcus chimed in, not looking away from the screen. "They're calling her Grandma Hero. Apparently, she pretended to be a victim so the scammers would target her. Then she recorded all their phone calls and meetings. The police say she was instrumental in bringing down the whole operation." Ethan turned to face me, his red hair still mussed from sleep. "They arrested 12 people yesterday." 12? And they recovered almost $1 million that was stolen from elderly people. His green eyes were shining with admiration. "I wish we could meet her. She sounds amazing." I poured myself coffee with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, considering the circumstances. "She does sound like quite a woman." The truth was, I'd been working with Detective Sarah Martinez for 6 months, ever since Mrs. Henderson down the street had been swindled out of her entire pension by a group calling themselves Grandchildren in Need Emergency Services. They'd convinced her that her grandson was in jail in another state and needed bail money immediately. By the time she realized it was a scam, her savings account was empty and her heart was broken. That's when Detective Martinez had approached me. She'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that I had a sharp mind and a protective instinct when it came to elderly folks being taken advantage of. What she hadn't known was that I'd been a bookkeeper for 30 years before I retired, and I could spot financial irregularities like a hawk spots a mouse. The thing is, I'd told her during our first meeting at the little cafe on Oak Street, these scammers count on older people being isolated, being too proud to ask for help, being so desperate for connection that they'll believe anything. But what they don't count on is someone who's got nothing to lose and everything to fight for. The plan had been simple, at least on the surface. I would let myself be discovered by the scam network, playing the part of a lonely widow with a substantial savings account and no family to look out for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was the perfect cover story because, as far as David and Sandra knew, it was almost true. But what Detective Martinez and I hadn't anticipated was how deep the rabbit hole would go, or how dangerous the people at the top of this operation really were. "Grandma Rose." Jasmine's voice brought me back to the present. "You're looking kind of pale. Are you feeling okay?" "Just tired, sweetheart," I said, settling into my chair at the kitchen table. "Surgery takes a lot out of you." Marcus muted the television and came to sit across from me, his scientist's mind clearly working on something. "You know, it's interesting that they made all these arrests yesterday. The same day you were coming home from the hospital." I said noncommittally, taking a sip of coffee. "And they keep saying the key witness was someone who'd been working undercover for months. Someone who'd earned the criminals' trust by pretending to be vulnerable and alone." Ethan slid a plate of what were definitely pancakes, though they had an unusual greenish tint that I decided not to ask about, in front of me. "Do you think she was scared? The grandmother who helped catch them, I mean. It must have been terrifying, pretending to be someone she wasn't, knowing that dangerous people were watching her." I looked at this boy who'd been through more in his 14 years than most adults face in a lifetime, and I saw the understanding in his eyes that came from knowing what it meant to hide parts of yourself to survive. I think, I said carefully, that sometimes the most frightening thing isn't the danger you're facing. Sometimes it's the thought that the people you love might get hurt because of choices you've made. Jasmine leaned against the counter, studying my face with the intensity that had made her such a good student once she'd found a stable home. The news said the criminals threatened to hurt the witness's family if they found out she was cooperating with police. That's why she couldn't tell anyone what she was really doing, Marcus added, his voice thoughtful. She had to let everyone think she was just ordinary. Just some old lady with nothing important going on. The kitchen fell quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of morning traffic. These three beautiful souls looked at me with expressions that ranged from curious to concerned to something that might have been knowing. My phone rang then, the landline again. Through the kitchen window, I could see a white news van pulling up to the curb. "I'll get it," Marcus said, but I held up a hand to stop him. "No, let me." I walked to the phone, acutely aware of 3 pairs of eyes following my every movement. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson? This is Channel 12 News. We're trying to reach Rose Patterson regarding yesterday's arrests in the elder fraud case. We understand you were instrumental in." I hung up the phone and turned to face my children, who were staring at me with expressions of dawning amazement. "Grandma Rose," Jasmine said slowly, "please tell me you didn't." The phone rang again. Then my cell phone started buzzing from the living room, where I'd left it the night before. "Oh my God," Ethan breathed, his eyes wide. "You're her. You're Grandma Hero." I looked at these 3 incredible young people who'd already weathered more secrets and revelations than most families face in years, and I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. "Sit down," I said quietly. "All of you. It's time you knew the whole truth." They arranged themselves around the kitchen table like they used to do when they first came to live with me, when every conversation felt like it might be the one that decided whether they stayed or went somewhere else. But this time, instead of uncertainty, I saw trust in their faces. Trust and love, and the kind of fierce loyalty that can't be manufactured or bought, only earned. 6 months ago, I began. Mrs. Henderson down the street was scammed out of her life savings. The people who did it were cruel and calculating, and they were targeting elderly folks all over the city. Detective Martinez asked me to help catch them. "So you went undercover," Marcus said, and it wasn't a question. I did. I pretended to be exactly what David and Sandra already thought I was. A lonely old woman with too much time on her hands and not enough family to look out for her. It wasn't hard to play the part because in some ways it was true. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes bright with something between admiration and concern. "But it was dangerous. They threatened to hurt your family." "They did. And that's why I couldn't tell anyone what I was really doing. Not David, not Sandra, and especially not you 3. I couldn't risk these criminals finding out about you and using you to get to me." The kitchen fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. The kind that comes when people are processing something that changes everything they thought they knew. "So when you were in the hospital," Ethan said slowly, "and your son and daughter-in-law were complaining about having to visit you, you were actually recovering from surgery while still helping the police catch criminals?" "The final sting operation was supposed to happen next week," I admitted. "But when I had to go to the hospital unexpectedly, Detective Martinez was worried the criminals might get suspicious if I disappeared for too long. So we moved everything up. That's why you were so insistent about coming home yesterday," Marcus realized. "You weren't just homesick. You were worried about the operation." I nodded. I was supposed to be at a final meeting with the ringleaders yesterday evening. When I didn't show up, they would have known something was wrong. But Detective Martinez and her team had enough evidence by then to move forward without me. The phone rang again, and this time I let it go to voicemail. Through the window, I could see more news vans arriving, and a few neighbors had come out to stand on their porches and point at my house. "Grandma Rose," Jasmine said, her voice filled with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "You're famous. You're a genuine hero." "I'm a woman who got tired of watching bullies pick on people who couldn't fight back," I corrected. "There's a difference." "No," Marcus said firmly, "there really isn't." Before I could argue with him, there was a knock at the front door. Not the tentative knock of a neighbor or the aggressive rap of a reporter, but the confident, professional knock of someone in authority. "That'll be Detective Martinez," I said, getting to my feet. "She said she'd come by this morning to debrief and prepare me for the media attention." I made my way to the front door, followed by my 3 curious children. Through the peephole, I could see Detective Martinez on my front porch, but she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a tall man in an expensive suit who looked vaguely familiar, and behind them was a small crowd that included what appeared to be the mayor, several police officers, and enough reporters to stock a small newsroom. "Oh dear," I murmured. "What is it?" Jasmine asked, trying to peer around me. "I think this is bigger than I thought it was going to be." I opened the door to a chorus of voices and a blinding flash of cameras. Detective Martinez stepped forward immediately, her dark eyes apologetic but professional. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm sorry for the crowd. Word got out overnight about your role in the investigation, and things escalated quickly." The tall man in the suit stepped forward with a smile that was probably meant to be reassuring, but mostly looked political. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Mayor Daniels. I wanted to personally thank you for your service to our community and present you with this key to the city." He held out an ornate key on a blue ribbon, while photographers captured every angle of the moment. Behind me, I could hear Marcus, Jasmine, and Ethan whispering in amazement. "That's very kind," I said, accepting the key with hands that felt steadier than they had any right to, but I was just doing what any good citizen would do. "Ma'am," said a reporter with perfectly styled hair and a microphone with Channel 12's logo, "can you tell us what motivated you to take such risks to help catch these criminals?" I looked at the crowd of faces, reporters, police officers, city officials, curious neighbors, and realized that my quiet life on Maple Street was about to become very public indeed. "I was motivated by the same thing that motivates any parent or grandparent," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "The desire to protect people I care about from those who would hurt them." "But surely you were frightened," another reporter pressed. "These criminals had threatened your family. Weren't you worried about putting your loved ones in danger?" I felt Marcus step up beside me, his tall frame solid and reassuring. Without hesitation, Jasmine moved to my other side, and Ethan positioned himself slightly behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence. "My family," I said, looking directly into the cameras, "consists of 3 remarkable young people who've taught me more about courage and resilience than I ever taught them. And yes, I was terrified that something might happen to them because of my choices. But I also knew that they would understand why I had to do what I did, because they've faced their own challenges with the same kind of quiet bravery." "Mrs. Patterson," Mayor Daniels interjected, "the city would like to honor you with a special ceremony." "That's very generous," I interrupted gently. "But right now, I just want to spend time with my family. I've been keeping secrets for months, and it feels good to finally be able to tell the truth." Detective Martinez stepped forward again. "Mrs. Patterson, we do need to discuss security arrangements. With this much media attention, we want to make sure you and your family are safe." I looked at the crowd of reporters and photographers, then at the neighbors who were still standing on their porches, watching the spectacle. Mrs. Henderson was there, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, her hands pressed to her heart. "Detective Martinez," I said, "could you give me just a moment?" I walked across my small front yard to where Mrs. Henderson stood, vaguely aware that the cameras were following my every move. When I reached her, she threw her arms around me with surprising strength. "Rose," she whispered, "they got my money back. All of it. Because of you, they got it all back." "Oh, Helen," I said, hugging her tightly, "I'm so glad." When I turned back toward my house, I found the crowd watching us with expressions that ranged from curious to deeply moved. The reporter with the perfect hair had tears in her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the morning air, "this is Mrs. Helen Henderson. 6 months ago, she was scammed out of her life savings by the people we caught yesterday. She's the reason I got involved in this investigation, and she's the reason it mattered." Mrs. Henderson straightened her shoulders and looked directly at the cameras. "Rose Patterson saved my life," she said simply. "I had nothing left and I was ready to give up, but she wouldn't let me. She said nobody had the right to steal my future, and she was going to make sure they paid for what they did." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "That's the kind of person Rose is," Mrs. Henderson continued. "She sees people who are hurting, and she does something about it. Not for glory or recognition, but because it's the right thing to do." I felt Marcus's hand on my shoulder, steadying and proud. Jasmine had moved closer to Mrs. Henderson, her young face serious with understanding. Ethan was watching everything with the intense focus he usually reserved for his most important homework assignments. "Mrs. Patterson," the Channel 12 reporter said, her voice softer now. Can you tell us what's next for you? I looked at my house, my real home, with the people who mattered most to me standing in the doorway, and then at the crowd of strangers who were looking at me like I was something special. What's next, I said, is the same thing that's always been next. I'm going to take care of my family, love the people who matter to me, and try to make the world a little bit better than I found it. The only difference is that now I don't have to keep it a secret. As the crowd began to disperse and the reporters started packing up their equipment, my phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID and saw David's number. Excuse me, I said to Detective Martinez. I need to take this. I walked back toward my house, my 3 children falling into step beside me like a protective honor guard. Hello, David. Mom. His voice was thick with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. Mom, I just saw the news. I can't believe. How long have you been? Why didn't you tell us? I paused on my front porch, looking out at the street where news vans were still parked and neighbors were still talking in excited clusters about the morning's revelations. I couldn't tell you, son. It would have put you and Sandra in danger. But we could have helped. We could have supported you. Instead his voice broke. Instead, we left you alone in the hospital while you were risking your life to help other people. David. No, Mom, let me finish. Sandra and I have been talking all night. We've been selfish and small-minded, and we almost lost the most important person in our lives because we were too wrapped up in our own convenience to see how incredible you are. I sank into one of the rockers on my front porch, suddenly feeling every one of my 73 years. Marcus, Jasmine, and Ethan settled around me like they'd been doing it their whole lives. You didn't lose me, David. You never could. But I hope this helps you understand that family isn't about convenience or obligation. It's about showing up when it matters, even when it's hard. We want to show up now, he said, his voice stronger. Sandra's in the car with me. We're on our way over. We want to meet Marcus and Jasmine and Ethan properly, as your family. And we want to tell the world that we're proud to be related to Grandma Hero. I smiled, feeling the last of my secrets dissolve in the morning sunlight. Come on over, son. Just be prepared. It's going to be quite a crowd. As I hung up the phone, Detective Martinez approached the porch with a tablet in her hands. Mrs. Patterson, I hate to interrupt, but there's something you should see. The story about your involvement in the investigation has gone national. You're trending on social media, and there are already 3 different movie producers who want to option your story. I looked at the tablet she was holding out to me, then at Marcus, Jasmine, and Ethan, who were watching this surreal turn of events with expressions of amazement and pride. Detective Martinez, I said, handing the tablet back to her without looking at it, I appreciate everything you and your team have done. But right now, I just want to sit on my front porch with my children and wait for my son to arrive. The rest of the world can wait. She smiled, tucking the tablet under her arm. Yes, ma'am. But Mrs. Patterson? For what it's worth, I think you're exactly the kind of hero this world needs. The kind who doesn't think what they're doing is heroic at all. As Detective Martinez walked back to her car, I looked at the 3 young people who had transformed my life from ordinary to extraordinary long before any undercover operation ever came along. So, Jasmine said with a grin, how does it feel to be famous? Exhausting, I admitted. But worth it, if it means Mrs. Henderson gets her money back and other people don't have to go through what she went through. And if it means you don't have to keep secrets anymore, Ethan added quietly. And if it means the whole world knows what we've always known, Marcus finished. That you're pretty amazing. I reached out and pulled all 3 of them into a hug that probably looked awkward to any photographers who might still be lurking around, but felt exactly right to me. The amazing ones, I said, are sitting right here on this porch. Everything else is just noise. As if on cue, my phone started ringing again, and another news van turned onto Maple Street. But for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. No more secrets. No more hiding. Just me and my family, facing whatever came next together. Real family, I thought as David's car pulled into my driveway, shows up when it matters. And finally, everyone was showing up. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. The crowd of reporters and city officials had finally thinned out by early afternoon, leaving behind only a few persistent photographers and the lingering scent of excitement in the air. I sat in my favorite armchair, still wearing the blue ribbon from the key to the city, watching Marcus help Ethan rearrange the living room furniture to accommodate what was about to become the most important evening of my life. "Grandma Rose," Jasmine said, settling cross-legged on the floor beside my chair with the same protective instinct she'd shown since the day she'd arrived at my door. "You've been checking your phone every 5 minutes for the past hour. Are you expecting another call from the mayor?" I smiled at her perceptiveness. This fierce 15-year-old who'd learned to read people's emotions like survival depended on it. In her case, it often had. "Not the mayor, sweetheart." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of yet another secret I was about to share. "There's something else I need to tell you three. Something I've never told anyone, not even David." Marcus looked up from where he was adjusting the coffee table, his dark eyes immediately alert. At 17, he'd developed an almost scientific approach to processing new information, but I could see the concern flickering across his features. "More secrets?" Ethan asked, though his tone was gentle rather than accusatory. "Grandma Rose, how many lives have you been living?" "Just one," I said quietly. "But it's been more complicated than most people knew." I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out the letter that had arrived 3 weeks ago. The letter that had changed everything, even before the surgery and the undercover operation and David's cruel words at the hospital. The envelope was worn soft from handling, addressed in careful script to Rose Patterson from Loving Hands Adoption Services. 47 years ago, I began, my voice steadier than my hands. I was 19 years old and unmarried. I was seeing a young man named Michael, David's father, but we hadn't talked about marriage yet. When I found out I was pregnant, Michael wanted to do the right thing, but I knew we weren't ready. Neither of us had finished school, neither had steady work, and both our families. I paused, remembering the shame in my mother's eyes, the disappointment in Michael's father's voice. Both our families made it very clear that keeping the baby would ruin all of our futures. The room had gone completely quiet. Even the old house seemed to be holding its breath. "So I made the hardest decision of my life," I continued. "I moved to my aunt's house in Chicago for the last few months of the pregnancy, and I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. I held her for exactly 1 hour before I signed the papers." Jasmine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You gave her up." "I gave her the best chance I could," I corrected gently. The adoptive family was everything Michael and I weren't: stable, educated, financially secure. They'd been trying to have children for years, and they promised me she'd be loved and given every opportunity. Marcus sat down heavily on the couch, his scientific mind clearly working through the implications. "That's why you understand us so well. Why you know what it feels like to be unwanted." "Oh, honey, no," I said quickly, leaning forward to take his hand. "She wasn't unwanted. None of you were unwanted. Sometimes circumstances make it impossible to keep the people we love, but that doesn't mean we don't love them with everything we have." "What happened after?" Ethan asked quietly. "Did you ever try to find her?" "Michael and I got married 2 years later, and we had David. But the adoption was closed, no contact, no information about where she went or how she was doing. All I knew was her adoptive name, Sarah Mitchell. For 47 years, I've wondered about her every single day. Whether she was happy, whether she knew she was loved, whether she ever thought about the woman who gave her up." I smoothed the letter in my lap, remembering the moment 3 weeks ago when I'd opened it with trembling hands. 3 weeks ago, this letter arrived. The adoption agency said that my daughter, Sarah, had been looking for me. She'd hired a private investigator, and she wanted to meet. I looked up at my 3 beautiful children, these young people who'd taught me that family comes in many forms. She was planning to fly here this weekend with her 3 children to meet their grandmother. Jasmine caught the past tense immediately. "Is," I corrected, glancing at the clock on the mantel. "Her flight lands at 6:30. She should be here by 8 o'clock. The silence that followed was different from the others, charged with anticipation and nervous energy. "That's why you were so desperate to get home from the hospital," Marcus realized. "It wasn't just about us, though we were part of it. You had 47 years of waiting ending tonight. And David and Sandra almost made you miss it," Jasmine added, her voice tight with indignation. "But they didn't," I said firmly. "I'm here and she's coming, and for the first time in almost 5 decades, my family is going to be complete." Before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the front door. Not the confident rap of official business or the aggressive bang of reporters, but something softer, more hesitant. "That's too early," I said, checking the clock again. "She's not supposed to be here for another hour." Marcus went to the window and peered through the curtains. Grandma Rose, he said, his voice strange. There's a woman on your porch. She's got dark hair, about 45 maybe, and she's carrying flowers. There are 3 kids with her, teenagers, I think. My heart stopped beating for a moment, then started again at double speed. She's early, I whispered, struggling to get out of my chair. Oh Lord, she's early and I'm not ready, Anne. You're ready, Jasmine said firmly, helping me to my feet. You've been ready for 47 years. I made my way to the front door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Through the peephole, I could see a woman with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a simple blue dress and holding a bouquet of yellow roses, my favorite flower, though she couldn't possibly know that. Behind her stood 3 young people. A girl about Jasmine's age with her mother's dark hair and serious eyes, a boy who looked like he might be Marcus's age with kind eyes and an easy smile, and another boy younger, with red hair that reminded me painfully of Ethan. I opened the door with hands that shook despite my best efforts to steady them. Rose, the woman said, and her voice was exactly what I'd imagined it would be during all those sleepless nights over the past 47 years. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I think I'm your daughter. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the threshold of my little house on Maple Street. I saw Michael's eyes in her face, the same warm brown that David had inherited. But her smile was mine. The slightly crooked smile that had always made me self-conscious until this very moment, when I saw it reflected in the face of the child I'd given up so long ago. Sarah, I breathed, and her name on my lips felt like a prayer answered. Oh, my darling girl, you're here. She stepped forward then, and suddenly we were holding each other for the second time in our lives, and it felt like coming home and starting over all at once. I've been looking for you for so long, she whispered against my shoulder. I hired investigators, I called agencies, I even flew to Chicago to check records, but your aunt's address was old and the trail went cold, and I thought maybe you didn't want to be found. I wanted to be found, I said fiercely, pulling back to look at her face, this beautiful, grown-up face that somehow still held traces of the infant I'd held for one precious hour. Every day for 47 years, I wanted to be found. I just didn't know how to look without disrupting the life you'd built. Mom! The teenage girl stepped forward hesitantly. Are you okay? Sarah laughed through her tears, turning to include her children in our reunion. More than okay, Emma. Kids, I want you to meet your grandmother. The grandmother I've been telling you about your whole lives, even though I didn't know where she was. Emma, the serious-eyed girl, stepped forward first. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Patterson. Mom's been so nervous about this meeting, she packed and repacked her suitcase 4 times. Please, I said, reaching out to touch her cheek gently. Call me Grandma Rose. And you must be Emma. I am. She smiled, and I saw Sarah in her expression. This is my brother Jake, and that's Tommy. Jake, the older boy, had inherited his mother's easy warmth. Grandma Rose, he said, testing out the words. Mom brought pictures. Lots of pictures. She wanted to show you everything she could remember about growing up. Tommy, the redhead, hung back slightly, but his eyes were bright with curiosity. Are you really famous? Mom said you were on the news for catching bad guys. Before I could answer, Marcus appeared at my shoulder, followed closely by Jasmine and Ethan. Sarah, I said, these are my foster children. Marcus, Jasmine, and Ethan. They're my family too. The introductions that followed were awkward and wonderful and overwhelming all at once. 6 young people, ranging in age from 14 to 18, trying to navigate the strange waters of instant family connections while their adults figured out how to be mother and daughter after nearly 5 decades apart. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah began. Rose, I corrected. Or Mom, if you're comfortable with that. I know you had a mother who raised you, and I would never want to take anything away from her memory. She died 3 years ago, Sarah said quietly. Cancer. She was an incredible woman, and she always told me that my birth mother must have loved me very much to make the sacrifice she did. I never resented you for giving me up, Rose. I resented the circumstances that made it necessary. We moved into the living room, this strange new family configuration, finding places on my furniture like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting decades to be completed. Sarah sat beside me on the couch, close enough that our knees touched, as if she were afraid I might disappear if she couldn't feel my presence. Tell me about your life, I said, hungry for the details I'd missed. Tell me about everything. She laughed, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what appeared to be hundreds of photos. Well, I became a doctor. A heart surgeon, actually. I specialize in pediatric cardiology, and I just moved here 3 months ago to head up the new Children's Heart Program at Regional Medical Center. The room went very quiet. Sarah, I said slowly, what did you say the name of the hospital was? Regional Medical Center. Why? Marcus leaned forward, his eyes wide. Grandma Rose, that's where you had your surgery. Sarah's face went pale. You had surgery? Recently? Heart bypass, I said, watching the implications dawn in her expression. 4 days ago. At Regional Medical Center. 4 days ago, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. I was on call 4 days ago. I was in the cardiac wing, checking on a patient in the ICU, and I remember there was some commotion about a woman whose family had refused to pick her up after surgery. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of coincidence and missed connections, and the strange ways fate sometimes works. It was you, she said finally. You were there, and I was there, and we were in the same building and we didn't know. I was in the same building where my daughter works, I said, wonderment creeping into my voice. All this time you've been here taking care of people's hearts, and I didn't know. Emma, Sarah's daughter, spoke up from where she was sitting cross-legged on the floor. Mom, tell her about the interview. Interview? I asked. Sarah looked embarrassed. Channel 12 has been following me around all week, doing a feature story about the new heart program. They wanted to showcase the human interest angle. Local doctor making a difference. They were supposed to interview me tomorrow about work-life balance and what motivates me to help people. But now they're going to want to interview you about this, Jake added. About finding your birth mother after 47 years. As if summoned by his words, there was another knock at the door. This time it was the aggressive rap I'd come to recognize as belonging to news crews. Oh no, I sighed. They must have seen Sarah's car in the driveway. Marcus went to the window again. It's Channel 12. And Channel 7. And, yep, there's the Channel 5 van pulling up. Mrs. Patterson, a voice called from outside. This is Jennifer Webb from Channel 12 News. We understand that Dr. Sarah Mitchell is at your home for a family reunion. Can you confirm that Dr. Mitchell is your long-lost daughter? Sarah and I looked at each other, and I saw my own mix of exasperation and resignation reflected in her eyes. How did they find out so fast? She asked. Honey, I said, patting her hand. In case you missed it, your birth mother has become something of a local celebrity today. Between the undercover police work and the foster children, and now this reunion, I think my quiet life on Maple Street is officially over. Before anyone could respond, my phone rang. David's number appeared on the caller ID. I should probably take this, I said apologetically. Mom. David's voice was higher than usual, tight with what sounded like panic. Mom, please tell me the woman on the news isn't. Please tell me you don't have another child I don't know about. David. Because Sandra just saw a preview for the 6 o'clock news, and they're saying something about Dr. Sarah Mitchell and a reunion with her birth mother, and they showed our street, Mom. They showed our street and... David, slow down. Is it true? His voice cracked like he was 13 years old again. Do I have a sister I've never met? I looked at Sarah, who was watching me with eyes full of understanding and just a touch of apprehension. Yes, I said simply. You have a sister. Her name is Sarah, and she's here with me now along with her 3 children. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. David? Are you there? I'm here, he said finally, his voice very quiet. Mom, how many secrets have you been keeping? None anymore, I said firmly. All the secrets are out now. We're coming over, he said. Sandra and I are coming over right now. I need to meet my sister. I need to apologize to her for abandoning you when you needed us. God, Mom, she probably thinks we're terrible people. She doesn't think anything yet, I said gently. She just got here. But David, come with love in your heart, not guilt. Tonight is about joy, not apologies. After I hung up, Sarah reached over and took my hand. Are you sure you're ready for all this chaos? She asked. I know this isn't what you expected when you agreed to meet me. I looked around my living room, at the strange and wonderful mix of people who had somehow become my family. Marcus was showing Jake his science fair trophy. Jasmine and Emma were deep in conversation about something that had them both laughing. Ethan and Tommy were comparing notes about their shared experience of being the youngest in their respective families. Sweetheart, I said, squeezing Sarah's hand, I've been ready for this chaos my whole life. I just didn't know it would look exactly like this. Outside, I could hear more cars arriving, more voices, more of the controlled excitement that seemed to follow me everywhere these days. But inside my little house on Maple Street, surrounded by children and grandchildren I'd found in the most unexpected ways, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. "Now," I said, settling back into my chair with Sarah beside me and 6 young people scattered around us like a living, breathing promise of the future. "Tell me everything I missed. We have 47 years to catch up on, and something tells me we're going to be interrupted quite a bit." As Sarah began to tell me about her childhood, her education, her late adoptive parents, her marriage and divorce, and the 3 incredible children who carried pieces of my heart in their faces, the reporters knocked again, and my phone rang again, and the circus outside my door grew louder and more insistent. But I barely heard any of it. For the first time in 47 years, my daughter was home. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. The evening news was supposed to start in 10 minutes, and my living room had never been so full of life. Sarah sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting gently on my arm as if she still couldn't quite believe we'd found each other. Her 3 children had seamlessly integrated with Marcus, Jasmine, and Ethan, creating a symphony of teenage voices discussing everything from college plans to favorite movies. But beneath the joy of reunion, something dark was stirring in my chest, not the physical pain that had plagued me for months, but the heavy weight of a truth I'd been carrying alone. "Grandma Rose," Emma said, looking up from where she was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Tommy. "You keep checking your phone. Are you expecting another call?" I was actually. Detective Martinez had texted me an hour ago. Asterisk results came back. "We need to talk. Can you have a private conversation soon?" Asterisk. "Just some loose ends from the fraud case, sweetheart," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Sarah tilted her head, studying me with the same perceptive gaze I'd noticed in her daughter. After decades of reading people's hearts, literally and figuratively, she'd developed an intuition that was hard to fool. "Mom," she said, and the word still sent a thrill through my chest every time she said it. "Is everything all right? You seem tense." Before I could answer, the Channel 12 News theme music began playing on the television. Jennifer Webb's polished face appeared on screen, her expression serious but excited. "Good evening. I'm Jennifer Webb, and tonight we have an extraordinary update to a story that's been developing throughout the day. This morning, we told you about Rose Patterson, the 73-year-old grandmother who helped police bring down a massive fraud ring targeting elderly residents. But as it turns out, Mrs. Patterson's story is far more complex and heartbreaking than we initially reported." The camera cut to footage of my house from earlier today, showing the crowd of reporters and the emotional reunion between Sarah and me on the front porch. This afternoon, Mrs. Patterson was reunited with a daughter she gave up for adoption 47 years ago. That daughter is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the renowned pediatric heart surgeon who recently moved to our area to head up Regional Medical Center's new children's cardiac program. Sarah squeezed my hand as her professional headshot appeared on screen alongside a photo of the 2 of us embracing. "But the story takes an even darker turn," Jennifer continued, her voice dropping to that serious tone reporters use when they're about to reveal something shocking. "Earlier today, police received troubling results from blood tests taken during Mrs. Patterson's recent heart surgery. Tests that revealed she had been systematically poisoned." The room went dead silent. I felt Sarah's grip on my hand tighten, saw Marcus and Jasmine exchange alarmed glances, watched as Emma's eyes widened with horror. According to sources close to the investigation, Mrs. Patterson had been ingesting small but consistent doses of Digitalis over a period of several months. Digitalis, a heart medication that in controlled doses can help treat cardiac conditions, but in larger or uncontrolled amounts can cause the exact symptoms Mrs. Patterson had been experiencing: chest pain, weakness, and ultimately, the heart failure that required emergency surgery. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her medical training making the implications immediately clear to her. "Mom, you were being poisoned? That's why you needed surgery." I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. "The question," Jennifer Webb continued, "is who had access to Mrs. Patterson's food and drink on a regular basis, and who would benefit from her death." The camera cut to footage of David's car pulling into my driveway this afternoon, then to a shot of him and Sandra walking up to my front porch looking sheepish and apologetic. Mrs. Patterson's son David and his wife Sandra had been her primary caregivers prior to her surgery. They had keys to her home, often brought her meals, and according to neighbors, frequently expressed frustration about the burden of caring for an elderly parent. Marcus stood up abruptly, his face pale with rage. "They were trying to kill you?" "The really sick part," Jasmine added, her voice shaking with anger, "is that they couldn't even be bothered to pick you up from the hospital after they tried to murder you." Ethan was staring at the television with the same expression he'd worn the day he'd arrived at my house. The look of a child trying to process an adult world that made no sense. "But why?" he asked quietly. "Why would they want to hurt you?" The answer came from Jennifer Webb, who had clearly done her homework. According to property records, Mrs. Patterson owns her home outright, along with significant savings and investments. In the event of her death, her son David would inherit everything. But perhaps more telling is what we discovered about the timing of Mrs. Patterson's poisoning. The screen showed a timeline graphic with dates marked in red. The poisoning appears to have begun shortly after Mrs. Patterson started fostering teenage children that David Patterson had publicly opposed, going so far as to threaten having his mother declared incompetent if she continued to take them in. Sarah's medical training kicked in, and she was already reaching for her phone. "We need to get you to the hospital for a full cardiac evaluation and toxicology screen. The effects of chronic digitalis poisoning can be—" "I'm fine," I interrupted gently. "The surgery cleared most of it from my system, and Detective Martinez has been monitoring the situation." "Detective Martinez knew?" Marcus asked. "How long have you known?" I took a deep breath, preparing to share the last secret I'd been keeping from my chosen family. "I've suspected for about 6 weeks," I said quietly. "I started feeling sick shortly after Sandra began bringing me tea every afternoon. Special tea," she said, "to help with my heart. The symptoms were subtle at first, just more tired than usual, occasional chest flutters. But when they got worse, I started paying attention to the pattern." "You started testing your own symptoms," Sarah said, understanding immediately. "Like a controlled experiment." "I skipped the tea for a few days and felt better. Drank it again and felt worse. So I started pouring it out instead of drinking it, just to see what would happen." Jasmine was pacing now, her fury barely contained. "You mean you knew they were trying to kill you, and you still let them visit?" "I needed proof," I said simply. "And I needed to understand how far they were willing to go." On the television, Jennifer Webb was wrapping up her report. "Mrs. Patterson's blood work has been turned over to the district attorney's office, and sources tell us that arrests are expected within the next 24 hours. This case serves as a tragic reminder that elder abuse can come from the most unexpected sources, even from family members who are supposed to provide care and protection." The camera cut to footage of me from earlier today, standing on my front porch surrounded by my foster children and newly found biological family. But perhaps the most powerful part of this story is Mrs. Patterson's response when asked about the betrayal by her son and daughter-in-law. Quote, "Sometimes the family that matters most isn't the one you're born into, it's the one that shows up when your heart needs healing." As the news program cut to commercial, my phone started ringing. David's number flashed on the screen. "Don't answer it," Marcus said immediately. "Actually," I said, standing up with more steadiness than I'd felt in months, "I think I will." Sarah started to protest, but I held up a hand. "It's time," I said simply and answered the call. "Mom!" David's voice was high and panicked, nothing like the casual indifference he'd shown at the hospital. "Mom, we need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake with the blood tests, and—" "David," I interrupted quietly, "I know." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I know about the digitalis in my tea," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "I know that you and Sandra have been trying to speed up my death so you could inherit this house and my savings. I know that you hoped the surgery would finish what the poison had started." "Mom, that's insane. Why would you think?" "Because I heard you," I said, and the words fell between us like stones into still water. "The night before my surgery, when you thought I was asleep, I heard Sandra say, 'Maybe this will finally solve our problem. Old hearts don't always make it through surgery.'" The phone was so quiet I could hear Sandra crying in the background. "I heard you agree with her, David. I heard my son, the boy I raised, the man I loved unconditionally, agree that my death would be convenient for him." "Mom, please." "I'm not finished," I said, and there was steel in my voice that surprised even me. "I've spent months wondering what I did wrong as a mother. How I raised a son who could look at his elderly parent and see nothing but an inconvenience to be managed or apparently eliminated. But you know what I realized?" David was crying now, ugly choking sobs that might have moved me 6 months ago. I realized that I didn't fail as a mother. I gave you love, security, moral guidance, and every opportunity to become a good man. You chose to become something else entirely. That's not my failure, it's yours. We never meant for it to go this far, he said desperately. The poison, it was just supposed to make you weaker, more dependent. We thought if you got sick enough, you'd have to come live with us and give up those foster kids. We never actually wanted you to die. Sarah was staring at me with horror and admiration in equal measure. Around the room, 6 teenagers listened to this conversation with expressions of disgust and protective anger. But you were willing to let me die, I said calmly. When the surgery was scheduled, you saw an opportunity for a final solution to your problem. And when I survived, you couldn't even be bothered to pick me up from the hospital. Mom, we can fix this. We can. David, I interrupted, there's a police car pulling into my driveway right now. And there was. Through the living room window, I could see Detective Martinez getting out of an unmarked sedan, followed by 2 uniformed officers. The district attorney has enough evidence to charge both of you with attempted murder, I continued, watching as the officers approached my front door. The blood tests, the digitalis prescription Sandra filled under a fake name, the financial records showing your debts and your expectation of inheritance. Don't press charges, David begged, his voice breaking completely. Please, Mom, we're your family. We made a mistake, but we're still your family. I looked around my living room at the people who had become my real family. Marcus, who helped me understand technology and never missed an opportunity to tell me he was proud to be my grandson. Jasmine, who braided my hair when arthritis made it difficult, and who protected me with the fierce loyalty of someone who understood what it meant to be abandoned. Ethan, who learned to cook heart-healthy meals and left love notes in my purse because he wanted me to know I mattered. And Sarah, this daughter I'd thought I'd lost forever, who had spent her adult life healing children's hearts because she understood the value of every precious beat. No, David, I said as Detective Martinez knocked on my front door. You're not my family. Family doesn't try to murder you for convenience. Family doesn't abandon you when you need them most. Family doesn't see your love as a burden to be eliminated. I walked to the front door, aware that 6 pairs of young eyes were following me with expressions of worry and support. Mrs. Patterson, Detective Martinez said when I opened the door, I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, but we have warrants for David and Sandra Patterson's arrest. Are you ready to proceed with pressing charges? Behind her, the uniformed officers waited with handcuffs and the weight of justice. I thought about the 19-year-old girl who had given up a baby because she thought it was the right thing to do. I thought about the woman who had taken in foster children because she had loved to give and they needed someone to care. I thought about the undercover witness who had risked her life to protect other elderly people from being victimized. Officer, I said clearly, loud enough for David to hear through the phone I was still holding, some family is worth keeping, and some family is worth keeping away. Book them. As the police cars pulled away from my house 20 minutes later, carrying David and Sandra toward a justice they'd brought entirely upon themselves, I stood on my front porch surrounded by my real family. Are you okay? Sarah asked, her arm around my shoulders in a gesture that felt like it had always belonged there. I'm perfect, I said, meaning it completely for the first time in months. My heart is finally healing. Marcus appeared at my other side, tall and protective. What happens now? I looked out at Maple Street, quiet again except for the lingering presence of a few news vans and the warm glow of porch lights from houses where neighbors who'd become friends were probably talking about the day's revelations. Now, I said, we go inside and finish getting to know each other. We make plans for Sarah and the kids to visit regularly. We figure out how to be a family that spans 3 generations and multiple definitions of what family means. And we never drink tea that Sandra made, Jasmine added darkly, which made everyone laugh despite the gravity of what we'd just witnessed. Especially not that, I agreed. As we turned to go back into the house, Ethan hung back for a moment. Grandma Rose, he said quietly. I'm sorry about your son. I know it must hurt, even though he was trying to hurt you. This boy, who had been rejected by his own biological family, was offering me comfort for the loss of mine. You know what, sweetheart? I said, ruffling his red hair. It does hurt, but the hurt is for the son I thought I had, not the man he chose to become. And the beautiful thing is, I've learned that love doesn't have to be wasted on people who don't appreciate it when there are so many people who do. As we walked back into my warm, bright living room, I realized that this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of love strong enough to overcome it. Not the family you're born into, but the family you build with intention and care and daily choices to show up for each other. My phone buzzed with another call from David's number. I declined it without hesitation and turned the phone off completely. "Now," I said, settling back into my chair surrounded by children and grandchildren who had chosen to love me just as I had chosen to love them. "Who wants to hear about the time I accidentally broke up a drug ring while volunteering at the senior center?" The laughter that filled my house was worth more than any inheritance David and Sandra had been trying to steal. It was the sound of a heart that had been broken and rebuilt with stronger materials, trust earned, love given freely, and the unshakable knowledge that the family that matters most is the one that shows up when your heart needs healing. And my heart, finally free from poison both literal and metaphorical, had never felt more whole. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily, and also to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.